again, thanks for being here. I'm Gabby, business analyst at Cogent. We have Edgar with us, which is always our moderator. He's an associate director here. And we also have Paul here, which is going to be our expert and a speaker today. He will have a moment to introduce himself in a bit. We will explore the key strategies, share some insights, and dive into the dynamic world of lean IT leadership. So if you have any questions, you can leave them on the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will take them. Welcome once again. And yes, so Edgar, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby. It's great to have you, Paul. So I guess this particular topic is going to be pretty interesting since in this dynamic world, right? We need to, in my opinion, we need to look for better ways to lead our teams, and especially if we can adapt to the different circumstances. I know we tend to say that each and every day that things are changing, and every time they are changing faster. But it is true. It's something that we are living at the same time. And it's great to explore other approaches from traditional leadership where things can be more adaptable, and then we can work in a better way, right? Not only for ourselves, but also for our teams. So that being said, thank you again, Paul, for joining us today. And please, I'll pass it over to you. Tell us a bit more about yourself and about the topic, right? I'm not sure, Paul, if you're on mute.
You're on mute, yeah.
I did the thing where I talked on mute. Whew. All right, well, at least we got that out of the way. Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Hudson-Mack. I'm a senior product manager at Integral. We are a startup consulting firm in Detroit, based out of Detroit. We have folks all over the US and in Canada. We are focused on lean as in software implementation, as well as XP style programming, doing pairing, TDD, look a lot at like how to make sure that code is modular. We do a lot of platform work for our clients, et cetera. So I've been here for 4 years. Previous to that, I was a executive director at a nonprofit here in Detroit, doing a pretty significant turnaround of business and finance and operations for them. And before that, I was at Deloitte as a human capital consultant. Before that, I was a teacher, doing Teach for America here in Detroit. Before that, I got my master's in social work in macro practice, also here in Detroit at Wayne State. So focus on human behavior in large organizations. So I come at software leadership from a perspective of how does this group of people get the things done, and how do we make the most and grow together and learn together and get results. And so I'm excited to share today one of my favorite frameworks, there we go, which is adaptive leadership. I was fortunate enough, I was the executive director of the nonprofit, to be part of a leadership cohort learning adaptive leadership. All folks here in Detroit from a group out of the East Coast that was leading the session. It's a year-long program. And the core idea of adaptive leadership is that there are some kinds of work that are adaptive and some kinds that aren't. And when we lead, we want to recognize that and then lead towards the adaptive work as well as facilitate the non-adaptive work. And so you see here kind of some traits of non-adaptive work on the left and adaptive work on the right. And the recognition as an adaptive leader is that you do different things with non-adaptive work. We'll talk about some of those different things today than you do with adaptive work. I'm curious, in the chat, feel free to drop your thoughts as you look at these bullets. I'd love to hear what are some of the things you do in software development work every day that are non-adaptive work, things that would kind of fall under the left. You can just go to say NA or non-adaptive equals and then drop a thought. Or that are adaptive work. Same thing, just make sure you indicate so it's clear if you think it's adaptive or non-adaptive. Give folks a minute or so here, to 30 seconds or so, to drop things in the chat. As you look at these bullets, which things do you think we do every day that are adaptive work, and which things do you think you do that are non-adaptive work? Hmm. Yeah, there's definitely times, thank you, Hari, where we have a set of requirements that's really clear and the solution's known. It's just go do the thing, write the code, plug it in. Absolutely. And that would be, I'm assuming, the Hari non-adaptive work that you're looking at. Other examples where there's work you're doing that's non-adaptive or adaptive? Yeah, I would agree with that, Bailey. Often in product discovery, you have to even come to understand what the client wants. There's also a lot of it's hard to know for sure. Like, sure, even if you think you have the right answer, will the client agree with it? Will the stakeholders agree with it? It's a lot of complexity and uh, murkiness in how to get to a win when you're doing that. Give folks a couple more seconds to drop any other thoughts.
Paul, can you elaborate on these points of victory known?
Yeah, so in non-adaptive work, the idea is that you would identify something as non-adaptive when you know what it's going to look like for it to be done. So when it's like, well, we will be able to see Stripe checkout load on the page. You can go show that a dozen other places. It's obvious. Versus like to Bailey's example of product discovery, the client comes and says, hey, we're trying to do this different thing in the way we sell our pizzas online, and we want it to look kind of like this, but you're not really sure if like how would you know that that's done? You actually have to define done before you can get to done. And so adaptive works involves not knowing what the win even looks like, or at least seeing that there's a very murky path to get to what the desired outcome might be. Great question. Thank you, Hari.
More of a testing
for,
hypothesis, right? Of the points of victory means.
Yeah, exactly. If you have hypotheses that are just pretty confident and pretty like, hey, this is my hypothesis about what needs to happen here. And sure, there's still assumptions in non-adaptive work. Like you can start something that you think is pretty clear and then discover something adaptive or problematic within it. But you're starting on a non-adaptive work pathway when you think you have a pretty clear pathway and a pretty clear answer that you're headed towards. You're doing a known thing. So for me, I love adaptive leadership, applying it to IT work, because there's a lot of both in IT work. There's times where it's like, look, this has been done a lot of times. There's known solutions, even in parts of it that are sticky or complicated or whatever. It's still just follow the instructions, play with it, debug it, whatever, and there's a way to get it done. There's other times where it's like we're truly being asked to solve a relatively innovative problem that there's not a known solution for. Or sometimes the other aspect is people, where there's a known solution, but if that will work for this group of people is a whole other question as well. And so there's a mixture of adaptive and non-adaptive work, which for me has made it really helpful to apply the adaptive leadership skills that I learned as a product manager to the work that I'm doing in software. What I was trained in as an adaptive leader is rooted in this article written by Heifetz, over 20 something years ago in Harvard Business Review called The Work of Leadership. And he talked about adaptive and non-adaptive work and gave these 6 principles of adaptive leadership. I'm going to focus on these 6 since they're sort of like the canon of adaptive leadership. I will say, if this is something that catches your interest, there's a ton of stuff out there. So you can go Google adaptive leadership. You can even Google adaptive leadership in software and find a lot of different resources. I'll share some of the resources that I've learned in applying these principles along the way that come from other places and tools that I use in applying adaptive leadership. You can also find a lot else out there. So these are the 6 principles. I'll give a quick overview of them and then move through them in a little more detail. The first one is identifying the adaptive challenge. You want to recognize where there's adaptive challenges that require more of your leadership attention, more innovation, creativity, and also the non-adaptive work that doesn't require that and can just kind of be handled via a more direct way, not using the adaptive leadership skills. Just go ahead and line it up, get it done. Maintaining disciplined attention is about recognizing that adaptive challenges are difficult. They require focus and they require intentionality and purposefulness and discipline in keeping that to get to the outcome. And so you have to manage towards that. Giving work back to the people is about recognizing that as an adaptive leader, you need to not just delegate, but actually fully give ownership of the outcome of the problem that's being solved to the people that are doing the work. you don't know the solution often, or at least even if you think you know the solution, you're not sure how to get there. And so you really have to give that work back to the people that are doing it to make sure that they're empowered to apply creativity and innovation to solve for this innovative problem that you've brought to them. Getting on the balcony is about taking a holistic view of what's happening, seeing the big picture. So when you're working with adaptive challenges, there's a lot going on. Things change quickly. You make discoveries. You thought you knew something was going to be like this, and it turns out to be like that. So you need to be able to both be on the dance floor in the mix of all of that, supporting your people, helping make that happen, being part of the work, giving the work back to the people, and then working alongside them. But then every once in a while, you have to get up on the balcony and kind of look at what's going on down here and pay attention to all of that from a higher level, and then take that back to the dance floor. Regulating distress is about recognizing that with this being challenging work, you need to allow people to work through it at a pace that they can handle and that's manageable for them. Often adaptive work becomes quite overwhelming for people, and it can cause shutdown or chaos, a lot of struggle. And so you want to help move through that discomfort at a rate that people can handle. And then finally, what Heifetz back 20-something years ago called protecting leadership voices from below. I think in our world today, we would now refer to a lot as psychological safety, or valuing autonomy and less hierarchy, sort of recognizing that no matter what someone's role is, they have important information to share, and you want to protect those voices so that they get space, so that they can bring their thoughts, so that they can show the point of view that they have, and that can contribute to solving a sticky, hairy, complicated problem. All right, so that's the quick overview. I'm going to focus on the first three because we only have 40 more minutes here. And we'll have some space for questions on those three. I'll give a very quick touch on things about the last three, and then have some open Q&A at the end. Feel free to also, as I'm working through these, drop questions in the chat at any point. So I'll start with giving my favorite framework for identifying the adaptive challenge. In general, this is a tool that I love for a lot of different reasons. This is called the Cynefin framework. It was developed by Dan Snowden in 1999. He was working at IBM, so it actually came from someone in tech, and has been used all over the place. The program I was in was for an arts and culture leadership, because I was leading a nonprofit that did cultural tours of Detroit. And so this has gone a lot of places, but its origin was actually in our world, in tech. And Dan was working on a lot of different kinds of tech problems and realized, man, some of these are vastly different from each other, and I'd like some way to kind of categorize the problems. And so he developed this framework. And the idea is that it helps you to know which kind of challenge you're taking on, because then you can respond, take the right steps to address it appropriately. So I'll just walk through each of the quadrants here. Starting in the bottom right, actually, with simple challenges. This is an area where it's clear known cause and effect. Like, you look, if you plug in this line of JavaScript, it'll load this thing and this will happen. And if that doesn't happen, that's pretty crazy, because that's pretty much how it works. So simple challenges have very direct, clear to see solutions. You just apply best practice. You just go do the thing. So in this case, when you have a simple challenge, you want to sense what the challenge is, make sure you categorize it towards the correct best practice solution, and then take the solution, respond. Above that is complicated challenges. So here there's a relationship between cause and effect that's clearly there, but it requires analysis, research. It requires expertise. You need to bring in the right people, because this is a hard thing to do correctly to get to the desired effects. And so while it's similar to a simple challenge, it's a lot more steps. Maybe the difference here is between like heating up a Pop-Tart and baking a cake. Heat a Pop-Tart's pretty, you just pop on the Pop-Tart and it's done, right? Because the toaster does the job. It's hard to get that wrong. Just a few small mistakes you can make, but just do the thing the best way, and you'll be good. Versus baking a cake, man, I don't know that I can bake a cake, to be perfectly honest, and have it go well. It's really complicated. At the same time, a lot of people bake cakes and it goes fine. You follow the recipe, you do it the right way. Maybe you get some advice from your favorite expert baker to help you with a thing you want a little different about your cake or whatever. And the same is true in software, right? Sometimes we have things where it's like, there's not just one line of code, but there's a repo over here where you see something that's been done pretty much exactly that way. You just need to apply that to your situation. There's a few changes you have to make, but pretty confident this is going to go exactly the way we think it's going to go if you follow the instructions, use the model, make the changes, et cetera. So you need to sense, analyze the situation, make sure you understand the complicated set of steps you're going to take, and then respond. So you're following good practice, or some people also say expert practice there. Complex challenges on the left, this is where adaptive leadership really shines. So the relationship between cause and effect, the actions you take and the results you get, is only going to be clear in hindsight. There's very little clarity beforehand of like if you really can get that result or exactly how you would get it. And so here you have to use emergent practice. You need to experiment. You need to bring in a lot of innovative ideas in order to experiment to see what happens. You need to be really good at gathering the data of what happened. So you want to probe, or some people use experiment there as well, to try things out, to see what happens, to get more information about the context and why things are happening that way, to help you understand how to potentially get to the effect, the desired result. That's the sensing part. And then you can keep responding to eventually create a reliable, sustainable, scalable kind of solution via that emergent practice. And then on the bottom is chaotic. This is also an area where adaptive leadership shines, but in a different sort of way. If you come into a situation and there's a systems level problem, there's really poor communication, like maybe it's an organization that isn't used to working remotely and they're using asynchronous tools in a really disorganized, poor fashion. Or there's really low levels of accountability. And so people kind of don't understand what's expected of them or how to get their jobs done and reach the desired results. Or maybe there's a lack of kindness or a lack of curiosity. And so there's a lot of conflict, but the conflict isn't productive. And so in chaotic challenges, you want to do something new, you want to make a change quickly. And so you immediately act to stabilize the chaos. Sense if that worked, if that got people to a better state where now things are in more of some kind of an organized, orderly fashion where cause and effect can be happening, can be organized at the system level. Often in chaotic, what adaptive leadership is seeking to do in chaotic situations is that turn things from chaotic, where it's like, it doesn't really matter what you do, things just happen and things are a little crazy around here, a lot of fire drills and whatever, into the other three kinds. So in chaotic, it's like, well, it's really hard to even understand what the causes and effects relationship is around here. If you can draw that into simple, complicated, and complex problems, you can then be able to solve those in more organized, effective, sustainable ways, because cause and effect now makes sense in the other categories. So that is the Cynefin framework. As I mentioned, I find it really helpful because I encounter each of these as I walk into different situations in software development. And so it really helps me to go, oh, I need to do a different thing. I need to ask the team to help me do a different thing. I need to seek help myself for how to do the things in each of these different challenges. So I'll throw up a couple of discussion questions here. Welcome people to answer these in the chat or to come off of mute and discuss as well. So when you think about your current backlog or whatever work tool you're using, where do you see examples of each kind of work in what you're doing? To use a similar format to what we did before, you might say complicated problem that you're working on is implementing this thing, or a simple problem is playing this set of stories for this thing, etc. Edgar and Gabby, curious from your perspective, where do you see at the stuff you do in Cogent each of these pop up most often? Do you have examples that come to the top of mind for you?
For the best practices, I would say we regularly are delivering, like either simple features or things that are, as you were saying, pretty well established. In particular, we work with SAP solutions, so of course we tend to go with the best practice, right? And what I'm thinking about is what you were saying initially, that sometimes something that should be simple becomes complicated, and it can tend to get complex and at some point getting chaotic, right? So the last example that I remember is we were working in a project that where we need where we needed to configure some security between two systems. And initially, it all seemed like a simple best practice thing that we needed to implement. But as we dig further, then it became complicated because the instructions didn't seem to point out the solution, right? And then we had to start investigating and researching what we could do there. And from there, we got to the point where we saw that we arrived into a complex scenario because for the particular thing that we were trying to do, there were no previous instructions and there was only like a small notion. So we basically had to compound what we knew with the things that we had researched and with small pieces from the best practices, trying to come up with something. And at some point, I would say that we even got to the chaotic space because it was not clear what we had to do, and the things that we had tried didn't work. So it was all, also rushing against time and like the client pressuring, like when is that going to be done? If it's just configuration, and we were like, yeah, it in paper it's configuration, but look at this, at that, and then you can see that that's something rather that we need to come up with, right? So with a simple example, we kind of went through all the phases, and then we had to kind of trace back on our steps and go, all the way starting from scratch, understanding again like the whole theory behind it, and then from there start building some pieces that in the end help us get to the result. But all of that kind of happened with a rather simple requirement. And I can imagine many other things happening that way, especially when we are building software, right?
I didn't even tee Edgar up for this story, but that is perfect for what often happens. And I think what's I love about applying adaptive leadership is it allows me to do two things. One is ideally be proactive and try to predict, like, I don't believe that one's that simple or that even that complicated. Let's dig into that first in these ways to find out. And maybe I'd love to be proven wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I'd like to be proven wrong before I believe it. Although no matter how much I do that, I have to admit that what you just described still happens to me too, where I'm like, shoot, we really thought it was that simple. And it was not. It turned into, no, it was, oh man. And exactly what you described happens. And in those situations, this framework helps me more quickly go, oh, do what you just described. Go, oh, it's shifted to this clearly requires at least a complicated solution. Oh, that complicated solution doesn't work, or at least we don't have the experts here for that. So it may be complicated somewhere else, but that's a big security thing, and no one's bringing a security expert that's done that kind of thing before and can guide us through it. We have to go actually experiment with how to bake this stupid cake. And it allows me to also communicate that to one of the things you said to stakeholders. Hey, this is what we thought. You explained it really well in your example. This is what we thought the problem was and how cause and effect would work. This is what we discovered along the way. Here's what we're trying to solve for now. It also invites those other people to either tell you the solution that they know, maybe I missed something, maybe I'm wrong, or acknowledge like, I don't know how to solve that either. And I can't give you the people to solve it. Thank you for taking on that very sticky problem. And so it helps with that, which can prevent you from getting to that chaotic state that you were talking about, Edgar, because at least now the team has some clear internal recognition of the shifts that have happened and the kinds of challenges we're taking on, and what they need to do differently to go to experimenting or at least researching a more complicated solution. And that can help guide the team. It also can then help us get some air cover from whoever else has expectations of us and our stakeholders for them to understand why this is going differently than we initially expected. I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about that in Maintain Disciplined Attention. So I'll jump us forward to there. So when I went and reread this article, I hadn't read it in several years. There was one thing that really jumped out at me reading it again, which is there was one word at the center of maintaining disciplined attention that Heifetz in his original article used a lot. Curious for folks to drop in the chat, what do you think that word was? When you think about maintaining disciplined attention, what's the one word that comes to mind? give folks about 30 seconds to drop their thought in the chat on what word you think is at the center of maintaining disciplined attention. Ooh, I like listening. I like mindfulness. Those will both go into the addressing the word that Heifetz used, but they're not the word. Other thoughts? Persistency is also very related to the word that Heifetz used, but it's not it. Give a couple more guesses from folks. Love this. Y'all are close. Attention to detail makes sense, although it was not the word Heifetz used. The word is actually conflict. What Heifetz talked about most in the maintaining disciplined attention was conflict. Any ideas why? Feel free to come off mute. Why would conflict be one of the biggest topics around maintaining disciplined attention?
From my opinion, it's something that exactly normally you kind of keep in your mind, right? When you need to solve something. So it's like coming over and over, and then in order to you to find a solution, sometimes you really need to put your mind into it and understand what is happening. So maybe that kind of recurrent thought will guide you to put this disciplined attention and try to solve it.
Yeah, I really love that. I think that's really right on. Feel free to drop other thoughts in the chat there. I love this one. The internal conflict a person has if they try to stay engaged is also really true. Heifetz uses the phrase work avoidance in this article and in others around that, where it's like, this is hard. Or I've heard there's also a phrase in psychology called demand avoidance, where this is going to be, it's the feeling you get when you don't want to go do a workout. And you'll be glad once you get 5 minutes in, but you're like, yeah, but I am not putting my running shoes on. F that. So that like demand avoidance, work avoidance, like this is hard. This is going to require something of me. The reason that Heifetz connected this so much is all of those things, the way we experience internally, or like we're afraid to bring those conflicts to other people on the team, or to say, hey, I think this is going to go disastrously. I got like a day into this story, or we started this feature, and oh boy, I see 10,000 problems. Is like, that's scary. That's upsetting. It's deeply uncomfortable. At the same time, if you want to get to a result, particularly in the situations like you were just describing, where something clearly is escalating from simple to complicated or complex, and you knew from the beginning it was going to be that way, you're going to have a lot of conflict. You're going to have a lot of uncomfortable conflict to work through about the work, about how we work together as a team, about different ideas to solve the problem, et cetera, et cetera. And what Heifetz pointed out in raising this about conflict is handling conflict poorly leads to a lot of waste, procrastination, the work or demand avoidance, where you do like the bike shed effect. You'll spend a ton of time on a trivial thing like how to build the bike shed, because that's a lot more comfortable than all the problems with building the nuclear plant. This came out of an actual thing that happened where a team realized they'd spent 45 minutes of a meeting that they got distracted by talking about the bike shed that they needed to set up for all their bikes, because a lot of them were biking to the site. And that cost $1,000, but they spent that much time on it and 2.5 minutes on the $28 million nuclear plant. This happens to us all the time. We end up with a lot of waste because it's tough to keep ourselves focused on the real problems in front of us, because that requires addressing a lot of conflict and having the skills to do it. I'll share a couple of things. There's 3 webinars that I gave previously. The YouTube links are here. Y'all will get these in the links to this presentation afterwards. I'm not going to make you go watch all of these right now. I'll give very quick summaries of them. And if these sound like interesting topics to you, you can go watch one of my other webinars from before. This first one on de-risking is really fantastic, and is one of the ways that I help our teams maintain disciplined attention, and they help me maintain disciplined attention as a product manager. Leveraging our backlog via really strong backlog management and organization tools is really important. This is a webinar that I give on that topic. And then also, you can have the most amazing de-risking strategy and the most amazing, beautiful looking set of epics, features, and stories. But if what's in them is really garbage, poorly written, poorly communicated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then that's trouble as well. So this is a webinar on better requirements. The quick hits on each of these I'll speak to. This first one popped into my mind actually with the story you told, Edgar, because in those situations, a de-risking strategy can't prevent it entirely, but it can at least help me discover sooner that that's going to happen. And so when you get together with the team and you're like, all right, we got this set of problems. We think these are the solutions. These are the ones that seem simple, complicated, and complex. Your team can look at it and go, we don't believe that. And here's the ones we don't believe and why. And then you can prioritize based on which assumptions seem the riskiest. Like, yeah, that security thing, none of us have done it before. And it seems unless security is always a mess. Let's prove that one out first. And you can at least find out sooner if those really risky assumptions are going to prove out true. The other thing I shared about in that webinar is how to take the smallest, boldest action you can towards that. So a lot of people feel like they have to solve the entire thing for a risky problem in order to truly de-risk it. And really the secret is finding a really lean, this is a huge part of lean strategies in general, small step you can take. So maybe you do a prototype of that security integration that's a quick day or two from a pair to go play with. And they come back and say, actually, it looks okay. I think this is going to work. It's complicated and it'll be tough, but this should work, all the way to like, this is a disaster. And you at least get that from a single story. So we will often write stories that help us do that to de-risk in a small step to at least find out how untrue or true that assumption is and what we might do from there. So that's what de-risking strategy stuff talks about. Let you go watch the webinar or ask questions here if that sounds like something you want to dig a little more into. Backlogs are huge, both because they are the thing that ultimately outlines your de-risking strategy, the way that you structure your epics, your features, your stories, the way that you prioritize them and order them is your de-risking strategy ultimately, because that's the order in which you're flowing the work through, what can be done in parallel, what needs to be done in series, because it's that dependencies. And so this Backlog 401 webinar that I gave is some of the principles that I use for helping me do that. Being purposeful, having epics and features and stories that have clear audiences, but also flexible. Sometimes you just need to run a story under an epic, even though it doesn't have a feature to de-risk something, for example, or to help scope out some of the features for that epic. Sometimes there's stories that go under multiple features, whatever. So having some flexibility, but also having clarity on how you're going to use the buckets within your backlog. And I've been in situations where we only use features and stories. I've had stories that don't have a feature. I've been in situations where you use epics, sub-epics, features, and stories. Whatever you use there, I'm less dogmatic about and more about being purposeful and flexible. I also think whether you are Kanban or Scrum, having workflow gates is huge because it lets you track the progress of work from someone's got a great idea to we started building it all the way to whenever it finally is in prod and being used by real customers. And that's really important. So I talk about those workflow gates in the webinar a little more. And then prioritizing everything everywhere all the time for me as a principle is actually really about de-risking. Your risk profiles are constantly changing as you build things, learn things, the world around you changes. Maybe that deadline moves up or moves back, and that changes your priority order. So making sure every iteration you're looking at prio and being willing to rejigger it as need be is really important. And then lastly, making sure the last two are about kind of managing the backlog ongoingly. Ongoing discovery happens, so it's not just reprioritizing, it's realizing, oh, we thought we needed this, but we actually need to entirely rewrite this feature because we learned some new things, or we discovered a problem. I bet this happened with that security story you said. You're like, this whole thing has to be rewritten because there's ongoing discovery. And lastly, capturing everything in the backlog. I see a lot of tendency for folks to like, well, let's just do that in a spreadsheet. It's easier. Or like, well, this executive doesn't like the backlog. They like to do it in a PowerPoint presentation on a status slide. That's fine if you have to do that. The backlog still needs to be the source of truth where you're building that slide from or updating that spreadsheet from, because it's the source of the truth for the work being done. There's more about that in the webinar as well if you're curious on that topic. And then lastly, I'll mention last set of tools that I really love for maintaining disciplined attention, applying the skill to software development is about writing better requirements. We use the exact same feature and story template unless a client requires something different of us. And even then we try to advocate for a similar template. But for the team, it means that it's faster to write stories. Anybody can pick up the template and write one. And it's faster to read them. I'm reading in the same template every time. So I just pretty quickly know what to expect every time I open a feature, a story, or an epic all in the same template. We also work to enforce a really strong definition of ready, DOR, and definition of done, DOD. What that means is that we are not going to play a story if it's not ready. And we know what that means on each, in different contexts, it's maybe a little different, but usually it means the engineers are confident they can accomplish this work. They know what they have what they need to go play the story. And a definition of done means that we know how we're going to prove it's done. We can see like, oh yeah, we can show you the result and know what it's going to look like. And then finally, there's some lean story tactics. I already mentioned a couple of these in some ways. Often use time boxes on these, where you've got big sticky problems. Your security example, Edgar, is a perfect example of where if we had recognized that early on, or maybe even before we started, we might have thrown a couple of time box stories to do a research spike. And then from there, we might have defined a mock integration with that security endpoint that we want to try. That would be more of an exploratory spike. I'll also often write stories for technical design. I realize that we've got an integration guide or we've got a bunch of UX spec from our designers, but some of it's pretty technical. So I'll give the engineers a story to say, hey, can you guys go write or at least draft the stub stories? I think it's probably 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 stories to do this. And it empowers the engineers to say how they think it's best to build this thing. And the story has the scope of that outcome. And then I can clean up those stories as a product manager. So those are often really useful as well to hand over. This is really about one of the next principles, handing the work back to the people to say, hey, I could do this myself, but y'all will probably tell me a bunch of things that are wrong about building it that way. So let's let y'all stub out the approach for building this thing that we haven't built before. Throw up these discussion questions. Feel free to throw things in the chat or come off mute. I'm curious, as you think about applying some of the kinds of things that I just shared, where in your backlog right now are you most able to focus on delivering high-value production software, and what helps you do that? What ways does your backlog help you do that? Maybe also where do you see problems where the least help you? Also curious which levels of your backlog are going well and which aren't. So maybe your story level is really great, but features you don't use as well, or epics you don't use as well, or vice versa. Same with maybe it's that the organization is good, but stories often lack detail or lack the links to the resources or whatever. I'm curious where things are going well and where they're going poorly. I can also go back to any of the previous slides. I know that was a little bit of a drink from a fire hydrant on ideas, so feel free to pull me back to one of those if you want to talk more in detail about how one of the things applies.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, from my perspective, right, I heard that you mentioned de-risking quite a few times, and I would like to know in your experience, right? Perhaps if you can also share with us one example of the real life where you actually de-risk one situation. So we have more idea on what that looks like in real life, right? I think that would be pretty interesting to know about.
Yeah. So thinking about a couple of examples and trying to decide which one makes the most sense.
Mm-hmm.
We did a lending application for a client, which included the state of Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew it was, they had already said, oh yeah, people have talked about how awful it is to do loan applications in Wisconsin, and they wanted to start with it. And we did not. We actually started with, because Wisconsin's one state, so when we're thinking about the risk level of assumptions, even if we end up sucking at Wisconsin, well, that sucks that we have to delay go live in Wisconsin, but there's 49 other states with a lot of business. So we wanted to make sure the riskiest thing was, can we get the single applicant for a vehicle loan to go in all 49 other states, generally speaking? Can we get, there were also as a joint applications, we did that next and said, all right, let's get joint application working where we can send to all of our lenders this loan application for buying a vehicle in all 49 states. And we also, in Wisconsin, just without fulfilling this one weird law in Wisconsin, the laws about your spouse. And then we did Wisconsin last. So the first part of that was recognizing that while Wisconsin was big and scary and complicated, and everyone talked a lot about Wisconsin, it wasn't that valuable. So it was risky, but not that valuable of a risk. And so it was not the riskiest assumption. It was the stickiest. It was perhaps the most complex problem. But our riskiest assumptions are the ones that have the highest dollar value attached to them if we're running a business. So that was one way we applied it. And then in the way we started working through Wisconsin, the riskiest assumption was that we would be able to take and put this little form in for Wisconsin and have it go well. And so that's actually where we started, was building okay, let's put this in. And what we ended up discovering was a bunch of, because you have to have, in Wisconsin, you have to have a sign off from the spouse, basically, effectively. It's an acknowledgement, sorry, remembering incorrectly, an acknowledgement from the lendee about their marital status and their spouse. You have to have their spouse's information. I think maybe they have to end up sending something to the spouse. You have to collect that. We didn't realize until we added that form and then started playing with it with the other things that, wait a second, what if their spouse is the joint applicant? Oh boy, that makes it really messy, because now we're asking them to do it twice, and there was a whole bunch of like dependencies that arose in the UX flow on the screen. And so by just putting it in the flow and starting to play with it, we were able to work through all of the different use cases. It took a bunch of time to get all those satisfied in the way that the screen flows worked and which radio buttons we gave people to indicate if their spouse was or wasn't the joint applicant. Also, you can't have those radio buttons show up on a single application because there is no joint applicant, so you just have to force the form to appear. And what if they go back and forth in the loan application? There was a bunch we had to play with. We could have tried to, we actually did try a little bit to design all of that first. And it was actually one of the engineers that was like, what if we just put the form on there and then start playing from there? And it actually worked way better to do that. So there's another way of de-risking by, instead of trying to perfectly think through everything, we were able to go at the risky assumption in a much skinnier way. We just put the form on and then started to play with which ways that worked and which ways it didn't. I think even if we had spent a full day logicking out all the possible logical possibilities, we would have missed one or two. And you find them by playing in the software. So that was part of how we applied this kind of de-risking strategy, in terms of taking small, bold steps to just make it work. And then finally, what was also cool was that allowed us to start sending data, as we got some of the combinations to work, to the lenders, to then validate the other risky part of, can we get this required legal spousal information for Wisconsin to the lender? Well, first we need to have it on the screen, and have it on screen in correct situations. We knew which situations at least worked correctly. So we were then able, at the same time in parallel, to start making sure the lenders could get that data, that it ended up in the right places. And so that allowed us to simultaneously do some of the QA and testing of getting the results to the lender once we knew that it worked on screen. That's one example I'd give there.
All right. And I'm just curious, were those assumptions correct? And in the end, people use that form?
Yes,
just
it did.
Out of curiosity, yes?
It did end up working out. And that is in use today in production. And I'll also say it's a good example, similar to what you shared about security, where I'm guessing there's someone else that has an online loan application that handles Wisconsin. I don't know if they did it the same or different. I don't know if they had single or joint applications, but we approached it in this sort of adaptive way as a complex problem that we needed to play with and experiment with this way, because we didn't have any experts around. There wasn't any immediate research that could show us how someone else was doing this in Wisconsin well, as far as we could see. And so it was easiest just to start playing with building it ourselves. And there is sometimes that relationship between where your assumptions are worth just exploring yourself in an experimental sort of way, because it's too expensive to go try to find the experts or the examples that exist that show you the recipe to do it right. I would say there, you asked about our business assumptions. They did play out. We did have customers in Wisconsin. It also played out that the way we had prioritized our risks was correct. And that was really important as far as kind of learning in this, that we ended up having all 50 states ready to go by the time we needed to. We got there faster by de-risking the most important, riskiest, most valuable things first. So we had a working individual application, we had a working joint application, which allowed us to better test Wisconsin rather than trying to like build it a step of the flow at a time with everything. So that also was an assumption that proved true, that we would get to the result faster. And the assumption that it would be better to go live with 49 never had to be tested because we got there in time because of the de-risking strategy. So that's another thing about de-risking strategies like this, is they actually often accelerate getting to results because you find the stickiest problems first, and that makes it easier to solve the other problems later on.
Okay.
It's like Mark Twain has a line about I suggest if on a given day you need to eat a frog, you do it in the morning. And if you need to eat two, you eat the larger one first. The idea of being like, yeah, if you've got an awful thing if there's some tough thing, just do it first, find out. The day can only go better from there. And I think in de-risking, there's a similar thing. We're getting through the most problematic stuff, finding out which assumptions are going to most likely to go sideways, makes the roadway easier as you approach go live. In the interest of time, with 7 minutes left, I did want to jump forward to the last couple. I'll just give quick hits on each of these to then give Q&A time at the end. Giving work back to the people. I think this is really important in software and the way we approach adaptive leadership in multiple ways. If it's simple work, being able to take the time to write out, here's the links, here's the thing, just go play the story, is the way to give the work back to the people. Now someone can just go do this work that we know the simple answer to. Complicated answers you're making clear, maybe via building a whole feature for it, assigning a tech lead to that feature that's got some chops and wants to dig in deep on it, doing a little more to help with the research and analysis part of a complicated problem, and or just designing research and or experimental research itself to help probe and explore in a complex challenge. The difference that I like to think of and the approach that I want to take in giving the work back to the people is between an orchestra and a drill sergeant. A drill sergeant, the idea is the drill sergeant knows where everybody needs to be, which steps they need to be on when, and everyone's supposed to be marching in order exactly this way, and it looks beautiful. If that's the context you're in, great. But I think most often when we're leading software development work or on software development teams, we're part of an orchestra. Is there a part that needs to be played, and it needs to be played well and in time and all of that for this to sound good? Yes, absolutely. Like, this is not anarchist chaos, but it's orchestrated. And actually, there's some freedom you need as an individual artist to play a little slower, play a little faster, play a little louder. And the conductor's also helping kind of organize that and guide that to keep things going, because it's a very complex thing you're doing. To play this entire piece. It's a unique performance of it that you're trying to bring out certain things in. Some of that's still super simple and direct, just play the notes on the page. But it ultimately, with this many instruments, with this much complex sound, it requires a different kind of leadership where each person needs to be an expert at what they're doing and then allowed to do it under the guidance of the director and kind of listening themselves and playing along with the piece they're playing. And I think of that with how we do work in software development, where ideally I'm inviting people to tell me, hey, does this story make sense? Does this feature make sense? Let's refine it together. Each of them is the expert at what they're doing and bringing themselves fully to playing the piece that's being given to them. For us, that's via our backlog. For regulating distress, the quick hit I have on that is this quote. It's my favorite quote about regulating distress. There's a lot of disappointment that comes with doing hard stuff. You think it's going to be easier than it is. You think you'll get to results sooner. Sometimes you think that it'll go faster, or you think you know the answer. I'm guessing there was a lot of disappointment that happened in that security example you gave, Edgar. People were quite upset to the point where you described it got to chaos because people were so disappointed that they just kind of were giving up, or just willing to try anything, not really paying attention anymore to cause and effect and what worked and what didn't. And so leadership and adaptive leadership and regulating distress is about helping people move through that disappointment that happens of confronting tough reality at a rate that they can stand. I mentioned quite a bit at the beginning about get on the balcony. I will say that perhaps one of the most important things for me in software development is having the right sense of when to go between balcony and dance floor. There's times where it's really easy to just keep running fire drills because you think everything's in order and the way it should be, and we're just doing everything we need to on the dance floor. And so I don't want to like step away from all that because like I need to help keep the work moving, and you end up kind of fire drilling very inefficiently. And you really need to go get on the balcony and go, oh, wait a second. Actually, now that I look at this from taking a little higher level view, taking a step back, and I kind of look at all the parts and pieces, I look through our epics and features instead of just our story playing velocity and throughput, and all the problems every day in stand-ups, whatever. I'm realizing some things could be reorganized or addressed differently. The de-risking strategy might need to be changed, et cetera. The opposite's also true. Sometimes it's like, nope, I don't need to get on the balcony right now. It's pretty clear that I should stay down here and keep helping the team and moving things along. And so knowing when to go between balcony and dance floor is a really key adaptive leadership skill. And often your team is the best indicator of that, which goes to the last one. It is not usually this obvious when you have blinders on, or where your blind spots are. And so knowing things like whether you should be getting on the balcony or staying on the dance floor is really about listening to all of the other leadership voices. Are folks confident in the work you're doing? Does it make sense? How are they showing up to stand up? Are stories taking about the amount of time we thought they would based on the way we pointed them? Do the surprises that popped up make sense and seem like, yeah, that happens, whatever, we're good? Or do they seem like, huh, something's out of whack here? Does the team have the right mixture of people and able to learn from each other? Are we collaborating well? Is morale where it needs to be, et cetera? All of those are things that actually come to me usually from the leadership voices from below is the language that Heifetz used, but on the team, from any role, from anywhere. Or sometimes it's from other teams, the people that we are doing handoffs to or integrating with, or that we throw things over the wall to, as far as like we're giving them, hey, we need this from you, or they're giving, and that's, I guess, is also a handoff in a way. Yeah, there's all that kind of places where listening to that helps give me feedback and information that then allows the team to function better. And the team needs to hear all of that from each other too, in order to continue to take on the adaptive challenge. So that's what I got. Thank you for walking through all of that with me. I know I've got a minute or two left here. I'm also able to stay a little longer if folks have questions. What questions do folks have? What examples from your life do you want to share?
From my perspective, I think we covered quite a lot of knowledge, right? For sure, from my opinion, it would take a little bit of time to digest all of the concepts and all of the things. But before we wrap it up, I would like to know, what are your favorite resources so we can go after this meeting, after this talk, and we can explore more and learn from start learning from experience and from other points of view. So what would be your go-to resource or set of resources that we can use to learn more about these leadership principles?
Specific to adaptive leadership, I'd say actually a lot of the good stuff I find is in blog articles. So Google searching adaptive leadership, seeing what's interesting, and then maybe adding more specificity to your keyword has yielded a lot of good results for me. Relative to where I see adaptive leadership applied in software or in kind of organizational management, I really love Brené Brown. She's a very results-oriented thinker, but who focuses on relationships and vulnerability and shame in the workplace now is really a huge part of what she does. So Dare to Lead is a phenomenal book by her. She's has great podcasts as well that are really helpful around everything from nuts and bolts of leading challenging work like this all the way to like diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And then Lean Startup by Eric Ries, if you haven't read it, I'm guessing a lot of folks have. Really applies adaptive leadership to doing lean software development and startup software work and startup work outside of software as well. I also really like Adrienne Marie Brown. She's more of a community organizing, kind of progressive political leader, and community builder. But what I like about a lot of the stuff she has, Emergent Strategy is the name of the book that pops into my mind immediately. There's a bunch of other books by her that are really good. Are that it's coming out of this very like relationship and politics oriented space, but it feels very applicable to business to me, where she's talking about models of how to organize people, how to lead, how to uplift folks and enable them in ways that I find very useful in the business world.
All right. Thank you so much. Now I have more material for my reading list for the year.
I can also drop
Thank
those as well in what I send back to you guys all with the slides. So happy to do that.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thanks, Paul. All right. So,
All right.
Yeah, please, Gabby, go ahead.
Yep. No. If there's any other question, and if not, then I think we're good for today. It's been great, Paul. Thanks for all that information. One thing that I want to request is that if you could please send us these slides. I don't know if it's possible.
Yep,
Great.
I'll drop a link for them for you.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I think we're good for today. Thank you once again, Paul. Thank you, Edgar, and thank you everyone that was here listening and participating. See you next time. We have another tech social next Thursday. So yeah, thank you again. See you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye.